Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy my stories. Please like and subscribe, and hit that notification icon so you never miss out. Now on with the stories.
Alright, let me tell you about this wild HOA situation I found myself in. It's been a real headache, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around how things got so out of hand. So here's the deal. My wife and I moved into this new neighborhood about a year ago. It's one of those places where they're still building houses left and right. You know the type. Construction noise all day, trucks coming and going, and that constant feeling of living in a work in progress. When we bought our house, we didn't have much choice in the HOA matter. The builder had already set one up, and it was part of the contract. We figured, hey, how bad could it be? Well, turns out pretty bad. From day one, we noticed things weren't quite right. The neighborhood had issues that needed addressing, but every time we reached out to the HOA, it was like shouting into a void. No responses, no action, nothing. It was frustrating, to say the least. After months of getting nowhere, we finally managed to get the HOA president to agree to a meeting. I remember the day clearly. It was a warm Saturday afternoon, and we'd set up in the community center. There were about 20 of us homeowners there, all ready to voice our concerns. The HOA president, let's call him Mr. Johnson, strolled in 15 minutes late. He was a tall guy, probably in his 50s, with a permanent scowl etched on his face. The moment he walked in, the room went quiet. You could feel the tension in the air. Mr. Johnson took his place at the front of the room and started off with, "I want you all to know that I never do this for anyone. You're lucky I'm even here. Don't expect it to happen again. I am the CEO and my time is valuable." I exchanged glances with my wife. This wasn't off to a great start. One of our neighbors, Tom, raised his hand. "Mr. Johnson, we appreciate you coming. We have some concerns we'd like to discuss." Mr. Johnson nodded curtly. "Go ahead, but make it quick." "I have other appointments." Tom cleared his throat. "Well, first off, we're worried about the speeding on Main Street. There are no speed limit signs, and with all the kids in the neighborhood, it's becoming dangerous. Is there any way we could get some signs put up?" Mr. Johnson sighed heavily, as if we'd asked him to move mountains. "Speed signs cost money. We'll look into it." I decided to chime in. "There's also the matter of the fountain in the Central Park. It was fixed a while back, but it's broken again. Any chance of getting that repaired?" Mr. Johnson's eyes narrowed. "Maintenance issues happen. We'll add it to the list." So far his responses had been terse, but not outright hostile. That was about to change. Mrs. Rodriguez, a sweet lady in her 70s who lived down the street from us, raised her hand next. "Mr. Johnson, I'm concerned about the playground near the pond. The equipment is rusting, and the rust is leaking into the water. We have a lot of wildlife that uses that pond, not to mention our children play there. Could we get someone to look at it?" That's when Mr. Johnson's demeanor shifted. His face turned red, and he leaned forward, pointing a finger at Mrs. Rodriguez. "You people are unbelievable. Do you know how lucky you are to even have a park? Most neighborhoods don't get anything like that." The room fell silent. We were all shocked by his sudden outburst. Mrs. Rodriguez, bless her heart, didn't back down. "Mr. Johnson, I understand we're fortunate to have the park. But if it's unsafe, it needs to be addressed. If it's not fixed, I'm afraid we'll have to report it to the proper authorities. We can't risk harm to the wildlife or our children." That's when all hell broke loose. Mr. Johnson shot up from his chair, his face now a deep shade of purple. "Report it? Who do you think you are, you ungrateful old bat?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I stood up, trying to defuse the situation. "Mr. Johnson, please, there's no need for name-calling. We're just trying to address some concerns." He turned his glare on me. "Sit down. You don't get to tell me how to run this HOA. None of you do." Mrs. Rodriguez's son, who had come with her to the meeting, stood up next. He was a big guy, probably in his 40s. "Mr. Johnson, I'm going to have to ask you to apologize to my mother and calm down." Mr. Johnson laughed. A harsh, mocking sound. "Or what? You want to take this outside? I'll show you and your mother what you deserve." The room erupted into chaos. People were shouting. Some were trying to calm things down, others were egging on the confrontation. I couldn't believe this was happening at an HOA meeting of all places. Mrs. Rodriguez's son took a step forward, his fists clenched. "Are you threatening a 70-year-old woman and her son? Is that really how you want this to go?" I jumped between them, holding my hands up. "Guys, come on, this isn't solving anything." "Let's all take a breath," and Mr. Johnson shoved me aside. "Get out of my way. I'm done with this circus. You want to know where your money's going? Too bad. You have no say in it. And those emails you keep sending, they're going straight to the trash from now on." He stormed towards the door, pausing only to turn and shout, "Meeting adjourned," before slamming it behind him. We all stood there, stunned into silence. Had that really just happened? Did the president of our HOA really just threaten to fight an elderly woman and her son? As the shock wore off, the room filled with angry voices. Some people were talking about legal action, others about trying to dissolve the HOA entirely. Mrs. Rodriguez was being comforted by her son and several neighbors. I found my wife in the crowd and pulled her aside. "Can you believe what just happened?" She shook her head, still looking stunned. "I knew it was bad, but I never imagined it was this bad. What are we going to do?" That was the million-dollar question. What could we do? According to our contracts, we were stuck with this HOA until every house in the development was sold. And who knew how long that would take? Over the next few days, the neighborhood was buzzing with talk of the disastrous meeting. Some people were fired up, ready to fight. Others were dejected, feeling helpless against the tyranny of Mr. Johnson and his HOA. We tried reaching out to the builder, hoping they might intervene, but we got nothing but automated responses and vague promises to look into the matter. A week after the meeting, I was out mowing my lawn when I saw Mr. Johnson drive by in his fancy sports car. He slowed down as he passed my house, giving me a look that could curdle milk. I just waved, trying to keep things civil despite everything. As the days turned into weeks, it became clear that Mr. Johnson had no intention of addressing any of our concerns. The speeding on Main Street continued unabated. The fountain remained broken, now just a sad, dry centerpiece in our community park. And the rusty playground, well, let's just say I wouldn't let my kids anywhere near it. Some of the more proactive neighbors started looking into our legal options. Could we sue the HOA, force them to actually do their job? The problem was, most of us were already stretched thin just paying our mortgages and the hefty HOA fees. A legal battle seemed out of reach. Meanwhile, the tension in the neighborhood was tangible. Every time an HOA vehicle drove through, people would stop and stare, wondering what new decree or restriction was coming our way. It felt like living under a microscope, always worried about getting a citation for grass that was a quarter-inch too tall or a mailbox that wasn't the exact shade of beige specified in the bylaws. About a month after the infamous meeting, I ran into Mrs. Rodriguez at the local grocery store. She looked tired, but there was still a fire in her eyes. "How are you holding up?" I asked her as we perused the produce section. She sighed, picking up a tomato and examining it closely. "Oh, still fighting the good fight. My son wants me to move, says this stress isn't good for me at my age. But this is my home, and I'm not going to let some bully chase me out of it." I nodded, admiring her resilience. "Have you heard anything about the playground?" She shook her head. "Not a peep. I've been taking pictures every day, documenting the rust. If they won't listen to us, maybe they'll listen to the EPA or whoever handles these things." As we chatted, I couldn't help but feel a mix of admiration and frustration. Here was this woman, in her 70s, having to fight tooth and nail just to get a safe place for her grandkids to play. It wasn't right. The following weekend, a group of us decided to take matters into our own hands, at least as far as the speeding issue was concerned. We pooled our money and bought some of those slow-down signs you see in neighborhoods with kids. It wasn't much, but it was something. We were out putting up the signs when an HOA truck came screeching around the corner. Mr. Johnson himself jumped out, looking like he was about to burst a blood vessel. "What do you think you're doing?" he bellowed, marching towards us. I stepped forward, trying to keep my voice calm. "We're just putting up some safety signs, Mr. Johnson. Since the HOA wouldn't do it, we thought." "You thought wrong," he interrupted, ripping one of the signs out of the ground. "This is HOA property. You can't just do whatever you want. But it's for the safety of our kids," one of the other neighbors, Mike, chimed in. "Surely you can see that's important?" Mr. Johnson turned his glare on Mike. "What I see is a bunch of troublemakers who don't know their place. Take these signs down immediately, or I'll have you all fined for violating HOA regulations." We stood our ground, a tense standoff in the middle of the street. Cars were starting to slow down, people rubbernecking to see what was going on. "Mr. Johnson," I said, trying one last time to reason with him, "we're not trying to cause trouble. We just want our neighborhood to be safe and well-maintained. Isn't that what the HOA is supposed to be for?" For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something, doubt, shame in his eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by his usual scowl. "The HOA is here to maintain property values and enforce the rules," he said coldly. "If you don't like it, you're free to move." With that, he got back in his truck and drove off, leaving us standing there with our signs and our frustration. As we reluctantly took down the signs, I couldn't help but wonder how things had gotten to this point. How had our dream of living in a nice, family-friendly neighborhood turned into this nightmare of petty tyranny and neglect? I looked around at my neighbors, good people who just wanted a safe, pleasant place to live, and felt a renewed determination. This wasn't over. Somehow, someway, we were going to make things right. We had to. Because this wasn't just about broken fountains or rusty playgrounds anymore. It was about standing up for our community, for our homes, for our right to have a say in how we live. As I walked back to my house, sign in hand, I knew one thing for certain. The battle with Mr. Johnson and his iron-fisted HOA was far from over. In fact, it felt like it was just beginning. You were likely dealing with the developer representative. While your community is under developer control, the residents have no say-so in the matter. The funds needed to support the community are paid by your builder. Eventually, the residents will have a board of directors made of community volunteers. For now, you have to embrace the suck. You don't have an HOA or an HOA, CEO, those don't exist. What you have is a builder-developer whose only motivation is to sell the rest of the houses and move on. I hate to break this to you, but they don't care what you want. They have zero motivation to listen to or deal with you. What they want and what they'll do is anything they think will help them sell the rest of the houses, make their money, and move on to their next money-making development. You want my advice? Don't give yourself the headache. You likely won't get anywhere with the developer. You might need to wait until the developer leaves and an actual HOA is formed that's controlled by the neighbors. They have a motivation to listen and are vested in the neighborhood. The only way the developer will care is if it somehow impacts their bottom line. FYI, for future, once the builder hands over the HOA to the actual homeowners in a normal functioning HOA, the homeowners elect the board. The board makes the decisions and sets the direction. They then hire a third-party management company to enforce what the board wants. At any point, the board can fire the management company. This is what had to do. And also, if the homeowners are not satisfied with the direction the board is going, they can vote them out as well. Ultimate power always lies with the homeowners. Problem is, too many are apathetic or don't understand how this works.
If you like our stories, then please like and subscribe and comment, and remember to hit that bell icon so you never miss out. We have new stories almost every day.
I woke up one morning to the sound of heavy machinery outside my house. Confused, I peeked out the window and saw a crew tearing up the sidewalk that ran through my driveway and yard. No warning, no notice, just a bunch of guys ripping up concrete like it was nobody's business. I rushed outside in my pajamas trying to figure out what the hell was going on. One of the workers told me the HOA had decided to replace all the sidewalks in the community. Great, thanks for the heads up, guys. I scrambled to move my cars out of the way so they could continue their work. For the next 2 weeks, I watched as they slowly made their way through the neighborhood, replacing sidewalk after sidewalk. It was a mess, but I figured once they were done, they'd clean everything up and make it look nice again. Boy, was I wrong. Just as the crew was finishing up on the other side of the community, I got a notice in the mail. At first, I thought it might be information about the sidewalk project. Instead, it was a warning that my yard wasn't being properly maintained. I nearly choked on my coffee as I read it. I stormed outside to take a look, and sure enough, the area around the new sidewalk was a disaster. They'd ripped out a bunch of soil when they put in the new concrete, leaving ugly bare patches. And the deep ruts left by their skid steer, that's a whole other story. My once pristine lawn looked like a miniature war zone. Fuming, I called the HOA office to complain. The conversation went something like this. Hi, I just got a notice about my yard not being maintained, but it's because of the sidewalk replacement. When is the crew coming back to fix it? Oh, they're not, the perky voice on the other end replied. That's your responsibility. I nearly dropped the phone. Excuse me, how is this my problem? Your crew made this mess. I'm sorry, sir, but the HOA only contracted for sidewalk replacement. Any landscaping issues are the homeowner's responsibility. The HOA representative said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. I felt my blood pressure skyrocket. Are you kidding me? Your crew tore up my lawn, left huge ruts, and now you're telling me it's my problem to fix? Sir, I understand your frustration, but the contract clearly states. I cut her off. I don't give a damn about your contract. You can't just destroy people's property and wash your hands of it. This is ridiculous. Please calm down, sir. There's no need for raised voices, she said, her tone growing colder. Calm down? You want me to calm down when you're threatening me with fines for damage you caused? I was practically shouting now. Put me through to your supervisor. Now, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. I'm afraid my supervisor isn't available at the moment. Perhaps you'd like to submit a formal complaint in writing? I let out a bitter laugh. Oh, you bet I'll be submitting a complaint, and not just to your office. The city council's going to hear about this too. That's certainly your right, sir, she replied, her voice now icy. Is there anything else I can assist you with today? I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. Yeah, you can tell whoever's in charge that this isn't over. Not by a long shot. As I slammed the phone down, I knew this was just the beginning of a long battle. The HOA had no idea what they'd just started, but I was damn sure going to make them regret it. I had argued with her for a good 20 minutes, my blood pressure rising with every word. How could they possibly think this was okay? They tear up my yard without warning, then have the nerve to threaten me with a fine for not fixing their mess? Frustrated beyond belief, I hung up and decided to take matters into my own hands. I drove to the hardware store and bought topsoil and grass seed, grumbling the entire time about how ridiculous this whole situation was. As I worked to repair the damage, spreading soil and seed under the hot sun, I couldn't help but feel like I was being royally screwed over. The kicker, as I was out there fixing up my yard, one of my neighbors came over to chat. Turns out the HOA had been planning this project for months. They'd discussed it at their board meetings, which, conveniently, are held at 1 p.m. on Thursdays when most of us are at work. So much for transparency and community involvement. I finished up the yard work, sweaty and irritated, knowing full well that if I didn't fix it to their standards, I'd be hit with a fine. It wasn't a huge job, maybe $150 in materials and a couple hours of my time, but that wasn't the point. The principle of the matter had me seething. As the days went by, my anger didn't subside. I started talking to other neighbors, and it turned out I wasn't the only one dealing with this nonsense. We were all in the same boat, forced to clean up after the HOA's pet project or face fines. I decided to fight back. I started gathering signatures for a petition to change the HOA's policies on community projects and communication. I printed out flyers detailing the sidewalk fiasco and distributed them to every house in the neighborhood. I even created a Facebook group for disgruntled homeowners to share their experiences and organize our efforts. The HOA, of course, didn't take kindly to my rabble-rousing. I started getting notices for the tiniest infractions. My trash can left out 5 minutes too long, a single weed in my flower bed, you name it. It was clear they were targeting me, but I wasn't about to back down. As tensions escalated, the community began to divide. Some neighbors supported our cause, fed up with the HOA's heavy-handed tactics. Others thought we were making a big deal out of nothing and should just fall in line. Family barbecues turned into heated debates, and once friendly waves across the street became icy glares. The situation came to a head at the next HOA meeting. A group of us showed up armed with our grievances and ready to make our voices heard. The board members looked shocked to see so many faces. Clearly, they weren't used to this level of participation. As we aired our complaints, the board's responses ranged from dismissive to downright hostile. They insisted they had followed proper procedures, and that homeowners were responsible for maintaining their property, regardless of who caused the damage. Their stubbornness only fueled our anger. The meeting devolved into a shouting match, with accusations flying from both sides. By the end, nothing had been resolved, and the divide in our community had only grown wider. We left feeling frustrated, unheard, and more determined than ever to bring about change. In the weeks that followed, the battle lines were clearly drawn. Those of us fighting the HOA faced increasing harassment, more fines, more nitpicky violations, even threats of legal action. But we stood our ground, knowing we were fighting for something important. As I sit here now, staring out at my patched-up lawn, I can't help but wonder how things got so out of hand. What started as a simple sidewalk replacement has turned into a full-blown neighborhood civil war. The sense of community we once had is in tatters, replaced by suspicion and resentment. I don't know how this will all end, but one thing's for sure, I'll never look at my sidewalk the same way again. And as for the HOA, well, let's just say they've made some powerful enemies. This fight is far from over. I would check your CC&Rs and state laws about legality of recording board meetings. I am a board president, and we would have handled that a lot differently. We would have sent out emails to residents letting them know the work was going to be done so they could move their cars off the street out of their driveways as needed, clear anything from the area around the sidewalk, decorations, lights, etc. This would have been discussed in the open session. From now on, ask that sessions be recorded and request the recording. As for your repairs, in my humble opinion, that is on the HOA. They did a common area project that affected your property. They should fix that. I would send a certified letter asking if your expenses will be reimbursed along with pictures of the damages. Get the work done within the timeline indicated on your violation letter, so you don't give them any grounds for further violations. Keep all receipts, invoices. I don't get why everyone's so upset. It's just a sidewalk, people. The HOA is trying to improve the neighborhood, and all y'all can do is complain. So what if you gotta fix your yard? It's not like it's hard work or anything. I bet half these people complaining don't even take care of their lawns anyway. And who cares about the meetings being at 1 p.m.? If you really cared, you'd make time to go. Bunch of entitled whiners, if you ask me. The HOA keeps our property values up, and that's what matters. Maybe if people stopped being so selfish and thought about the community for once, we wouldn't have these problems. Just suck it up and deal with it like adults instead of throwing tantrums over a little dirt. Y'all are missing the real issue here. This ain't about sidewalks or yard maintenance. It's about power and control. These HOA boards think they can just push people around and do whatever they want. It's a microcosm of what's wrong with society today. The little guy gets screwed while the folks in charge make up rules to benefit themselves. We need to stand up and fight back against this kind of tyranny. Whether it's in our neighborhoods or our government, this story just shows how easy it is for power to corrupt people. Bet these HOA board members think they're hot stuff, lording over their little kingdom. Well, I say it's time to overthrow the kings and queens of the cul-de-sac. We need a revolution in how these communities are run. Power to the people, not the pencil pushers. Don't let them divide us. Unite and fight back.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.